In this series of tutorials, we'll be projection mapping a house. In this tutorial, we will be designing some unique Halloween-inspired video content for house projection mapping in After Effects using free footage gathered online. Even though the designs are for Halloween projection, the idea is to teach you the basics of animating in After Effects, which you can then apply to Christmas video mapping or any other kind of holiday projection, digital decorations, or building mapping more generally. I'm going to be keeping this very simple. This isn't going to be a complete lesson in animating in After Effects by any means. The idea is to get you started by showing you how to use free footage that you gather online and how to prepare it, lay it out on the house, along with some simple animations and creative techniques that you can apply. Eventually, you will be able to create unique content that's totally different from anything other people might be projecting onto their houses for the holidays. I've already imported this footage. This is all free to use and gathered from various sources online. Stick around to the end for my tips on where to find this kind of footage. So my idea for something that will be simple but visually interesting using stock footage is I want to create an animation on the house where it looks like spotlights or maybe torchlights are flashing on, shining at the house and casting shadows from some spooky Halloween elements as if they are just in front of the house getting caught in the light. Simple but effective, I hope. I already have my guide outlines, which I created in the previous tutorial. I'll set it to be a guide layer so it won't show up in any of my final renders. I'll turn off the visibility of my masked layers and my original house image. First, we need something for our light to hit, so I'll make a white solid. Now I'll create a light. I'll make it a spotlight and keep all these settings, including having cast shadows checked on. Nothing's changed. Why not? Well, the light operates in 3D space, but everything in our scene so far is a 2D layer. You can tell if your layer is set to 3D or not by checking this 3D layer column. You might need to reveal these settings by clicking here. So I can see nothing is 3D. If I make my white solid 3D, the spotlight has an effect. I'll make sure my guide outlines are above the other layers. I might also make the stroke color of the outlines red so that it shows up a bit better. I want it to look like the spotlight is on the ground in front of the house, shining up, so I'll pull it into position with the handles. This is the point of interest for the light, so I'll make it shine on this top window. I want to swivel down the properties of the light and go into the light options and bring in this cone angle, up the cone feather to 100% to soften those edges, and change the fall off to inverse square clamped to be a bit more physically realistic. Increase the radius to make a hotspot in the middle. In real life, this spotlight would hit these dormer windows and cast a shadow onto the roof. So to really sell this effect, we are going to try and recreate that shadowing by faking some 3D geometry. I'll create some shapes for the main parts of the house. Make sure no layers are selected and choose the pen tool and click out a shape. You can add a fill up here and change the fill color. You can also remove the stroke. You might be wondering, why are we going through this process again when we just did something similar with masks when we were making our guide outlines? I'll explain why in a moment. Rename this, then click elsewhere to deselect it before starting your next shape. It's important that the shapes are on separate layers. I want these to be 3D layers as well, so they will be affected by lights. Switch to 2 views and change one of the views to a custom view and adjust the camera with the unified camera tool. And then change our main camera view from active camera to front. Our outlines disappear, so we should set them to be a 3D layer. And in the material options, make sure they do not accept shadows and do not accept lights. We are going to try and fake some 3D geometry. We need to move these shapes forwards and backwards on the Z axis, that's nearer or further away from the camera, to approximate where they are in relation to one another in real life. Starting with this roof, I want to rotate it back like the real roof. I'll move the anchor points down to the bottom first by using the pan behind tool. And holding Control so it snaps to this node. Then I can change its rotation by hitting R to bring up its rotation and changing the value in X. It will be easier to see what's going on if the left house shape had some extrusion, some thickness, rather than just being a thin 2D layer. To do that, I'll need to change my renderer from Classic 3D to Cinema 4D. Now these geometry options are available, and I can increase the extrusion depth. These extrude options are only available for shape layers, which is why I didn't use the masked solids from the previous tutorial. I'll just nudge the left house shape layer back in the Z-axis to avoid that glitchiness that's occurring. Then I'll adjust the left roof rotation some more. I'm totally eyeballing this, but that looks angled enough to represent the roof. If I turn my house image back on, and remember to make it a 3D layer so it's affected by the light, I can see that I need to scale my roof to compensate for the fact that it's tilted back now. That looks good. The right-hand side of the house I'm mapping is slightly set back from the larger part, so I'll grab both the right house and right roof and move them back on the Z-axis. You need to be in the selection tool to do this. We're not seeing any shadows cast. To see these, we should swivel down the material options of the main house shapes and turn on Cast Shadows. Go back to one view. If we reveal the properties of the light, we might want to turn down the shadow darkness. 75% looks okay, and increase the diffusion a touch, 15 pixels or so. Now what's really great about this is if we move the light, the shadows react. Of course, if you've got the time and the inclination, you can make extruded shapes for all the parts of the house. You can make windowsills and other details that might be on your house to cast as many shadows as possible. You can make some really cool effects using this technique, but I'll leave that to your creativity for now. So I'm going to plan ahead a little bit. I think I want 5 moments where we glimpse a spooky thing. I want to see them for 4 seconds, with 2 seconds between. I'm working with 25 frames per second, so I want to see each thing for 100 frames with 50 frames in between. They will be quick glimpses, but I think there's an argument for less is more with this. I type in 100 to set the playhead to frame 100, and making sure I've got no layers selected, make a marker with the asterisk above my number pad. Then I can hit +50 to move on 50 frames and add another marker, and so on for as many glimpses as I want. These markers will help me jump around easily in the timeline. I'm going to change my renderer back to Classic 3D. Now is the time to start bringing in the footage you want to use in your animations. Mine is already in my scene, but if I wanted to import some footage, I would go up to File, Import, and bring in any clips I wanted to use. I'm going to start with these spiders. Drag the video into our comp above the house shapes but below our outlines. Make it a 3D layer. Scale it up. And set the blend mode of the spiders to multiply, so the pixel values of this layer are multiplied by those below. Essentially, white pixels have a value of 1 and so show what's underneath. Black pixels with a value of 0, when multiplied by any value below, equals 0, so nothing shows underneath. I'll bring it forward a bit in the timeline so we see plenty of spiders. I'm going to bring in a big spider and make it a 3D layer. Take out the green screen by using the key light effect. Solo it and turn off the spotlight momentarily. Pick out the green using the color picker. All the green is keyed out. Scale down the spider and move it closer to the ground. Pull down the point of interest on our light a bit. I want to animate the spider scuttling along the ground. So at 0 frames, it will be here. Set a position keyframe by opening its position using P and hitting the stopwatch. Then, after 4 seconds, which will be in 100 frames, where I've already set a marker, move it to the other side of the house and a new keyframe has been made. So now it moves from here to here over 100 frames. You can view a preview by hitting 0 on your number pad. That looks good. I think I should blur the spider so it looks more like a shadow being cast. At the moment it's a bit sharp. Add a Gaussian blur effect. And 20 I think is about right. We don't want to lose too much detail. I want to give the light a bit more personality. I want it to flicker on, so at frame 0, keyframe the intensity at 0. Move 1 frame forward and maybe make the intensity 50%. Then back to 0 and make it go up and down a few times to different intensity values before settling at 100%. I want it to seem like the light is roving around, looking for something and then finding the spider. So at frame 0, I'll start maybe up here and stay there for about 20 frames. so I'll set a keyframe for the position of its point of interest at 20 frames. Then over about 3 frames, move over here for another 20 frames, so I'll copy and paste this keyframe 20 seconds on in the timeline. So the point of interest doesn't move during this time. Then it will land on the spider, taking 3 frames to get there. So what's next? I want the light to flicker off so we can copy these keyframes from the beginning and add some more keyframes at the beginning and the end, so it starts on 100 and flickers to 0 intensity. At this point we end the spider layers with Alt close square bracket. I might give them their own layer colour to stay organised. Move about 50 frames forward to our next marker, which gives us a 2-second break before the next event. I've got this footage of a witch. I'll drag it to the comp above the spiders and move it along the timeline so there's enough footage to cover her 4-second appearance between frames 150 and 250. I'll give the layer a colour of its own to help distinguish it. I'll make it a 3D layer. We can't see her because our light intensity is keyframed down to 0, remember when we animated it to flicker off, so turn off the light altogether to see the witch. I'll scale her down, drag to position her, remove the green screen with key light again. I'll have her move from over here to over here over the course of 100 frames. We can copy the blur from the big spider and give it to the witch. The light can flicker on over here, so set a keyframe as the witch starts to move at frame 150. Hit U to see the keyframes on the layer. Because the last keyframe we set was all the way back here, the point of interest is going to interpolate between these 2 points. We want the light to move while it's off, so make sure to copy its last position keyframe to after the time it has flickered off. We can borrow the flicker on keyframes from the start of the animation again. Then change the point of interest to follow the witch as she goes by. I've got these bats which I thought could erupt as the witch flies past. Flicker the light off by copying and pasting the keyframes we made earlier. Next up, I want to use these zombie hands. They're part of a longer clip, so when I've dragged them into my comp, I need to find the right section I want. Then I'll remove the green screen in the usual way. This clip is different from the ones I've used so far because it's got some colour. I could keep the colour, but I want to carry on with this idea of casting shadows, so I can make the visible pixels black with a fill effect. And I add the blur by borrowing it from one of my other layers. Now I can animate my light again to flicker on and explore all the different hands in the same way as I did before. Using exactly the same techniques we just covered, I've made a few tweaks. I've also created some other moments and reordered them a bit. I've got these bats hanging with lots of gnarled branches obscuring them, plenty of blur. And I have this weird smoky ghost woman drifting across. Both the bats and the ghost were free green screen footage I found online, so you treat them exactly like we did the spiders and the witch. I've added a second light to show up all the hands. I've also added some gritty, grungy texture with its blend mode set to multiply. And I've changed the colour of the light. I've set keyframes in the light's properties so that the light will shift between the colours while it's not seen. So it flickers off as one colour and comes back up as another. You never see it shift. So now I'm ready to export my animation. My composition ends here, so I'm going to drag the end of my work area so that I don't render more than I need. I'll render this whole thing by going to File, Export, Add to Render Queue. Use Best Settings, and I'm going to export to something lossless like a PNG sequence. Set its output and hit Render. In the course of making this video, I found plenty of free footage online which can be incorporated into designs like these. A lot of the time, this kind of footage is marked as being free to use. Do try to check that it is free to use and you're not infringing on someone else's copyright and hard work. There are channels on YouTube that are offering free green screen footage. What you can do with these is copy the URL and then paste it into a site that allows you to download video from YouTube. There are other sites that don't require sign up where you can download free footage. I've put together a list of places where I found free footage which you can check out. I've put a link in the description. Can you recommend any places online to find free footage? Share them in the comments and see you in the next tutorial.